It's Tuesday mid-morning, and you have some place to be. The store, a doctor's appointment, hot yoga, it doesn't matter where, really. So what do? For most of us, the answer is pretty clear. You jump in your car. Maybe if it's close enough, you lace up your shoes to walk, or you ride your bike. Perhaps you hail a rideshare car. Whatever. You choose a transportation mode, and then you just go. But what if none of those options I just mentioned are available to you? What if you're an older adult without a car? Perhaps pair that with limited mobility. Maybe you suffer from a neurological disorder that impairs your muscles and movement. No car, no bike, no cab. How are you getting to that appointment? What if you didn't even have an appointment? All you wanted to do was go and enjoy some sunshine at the park. How do you get there? It bears consideration because there is a huge community of people out there who are affected by the lack of accessible, reliable transportation. And that population is growing. Thankfully, there are also people out there working to help make mobility, especially accessible mobility, a priority. I'm Jacob Carrozza, and you're listening to Now at Ohio State. We talk with researchers, innovators, and bold thinkers who look at our world, see what the real challenges are, and create the solutions that people need now. Marisa Sheldon and Christine Happel are, respectively, the director and assistant director of the Age-Friendly Innovation Center here in Central Ohio. The center works to innovate with older adults through research, education, and engagement to ensure inclusion and build resiliency to make communities more age-friendly. From helping folks try new activities and make new friends to the basics of getting around their neighborhoods, Marisa and Christine are helping older adults stay active, involved, and mobile. They sit down with our Franny Lazarus to discuss the older adult population as a whole, what the Age-Friendly Innovation Center aims to accomplish, and how these innovative communities across the nation are impacting the mobility of older adults.
Christine, Marisa, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's so great to be here.
I feel like it's important to set some ground rules for the population that we're going to be talking about, that language is very important when talking about Ohio's older population. What are words we should use and words we shouldn't use?
The way I always default is what I want to be called when I'm older. And what feels most respectful to me is older adult or a person over the age of. When we think about words like senior or elderly, they often have negative connotations and have a lot of kind of baggage when you think about what those words might mean.
And there's maybe this tendency to other even when you are an older adult. So talk about older adults as if you're not part of that population and just invite folks to, include yourselves in that group. And that's maybe why we use this phrase aspiring older adult, just to recognize that we will also one day be old. We're all part of this aging population, and just to see ourselves there one day as well.
Yeah, I think if we use that inclusive language and think of ourselves in that same group or being in that group one day, we're more invested in the changes that could happen to support those folks. I think about the folks working in our government and our politicians, and so often we hear that from them, even if they are a part of that older cohort, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they're often talking about policies related to older adults about them, about those folks, not even identifying for themselves that they're a part of that cohort.
I'd love to talk about your work. You both come to us from the Age-Friendly Innovation Center. Let's talk about it. What is it?
About 2 decades ago, the World Health Organization said, we are having a shift in our demographics across the whole world. We will have more older adults than we've ever had before. Here in the U.S., we know that is driven by the baby boomer generation. And so what can we do as communities to see this as an opportunity to reshape our communities for the better? So in 2016, Columbus joined the Age-Friendly Communities Network. And when we joined in 2016, we were only the 64th community in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
We were pretty early, and now there are almost 850 communities in this network.
Wow.
It's huge. It's really exciting. Millions and millions of people, even just here in Ohio, are living in these communities. And the age-friendly framework is not saying we are an age-friendly community. what it is asking of our communities is to bring older adults into a conversation through assessment and planning to move forward strategies that will make us more age-friendly. So a really holistic view of what it means to be engaged in your community, whether that's transportation, like we're going to talk about today, or housing or emergency preparedness, employment, kind of that whole spectrum of the life of an older adult. And so as we wrapped up that first 5-year round here in Central Ohio, we said, we are a research-informed work, which is rare in the Age-Friendly Network, and we want to make sure that we can get that out into communities across the U.S. And so becoming the Age-Friendly Innovation Center allowed us to expand beyond our county borders and really push out our knowledge across the state of Ohio and across the country.
Oh, wow. What an asset.
Yeah.
Who or what are experience experts?
So for us, the experience experts are the older adults in our community. While I have lots of ideas that we could move forward to make our community more age-friendly, we believe deeply that we want to hear it from our residents. We want to hear it through surveys that we deploy, through focus groups, through our Age-Friendly Innovation Center Resident Council, and through those building of relationships. So that could be broadly about what they identify as kind of those big areas of focus for us, or it could be really, really in the weeds in thinking about transportation or thinking about emergency preparedness and really talking about the details of that work. We always look to their voice as a grounding to our work and honor them through that language of experience experts, because we see them as partners and we see them as a critical part of our work, just like you'd see any other expert in your life. Who better to tell you what it feels like to be an older adult riding the bus for the first time than an older adult riding the bus for the first time?
On the receiving end of that, it feels more empowering, and I would be more likely to listen to the recommendations if I felt like they were made with me in mind.
Absolutely, yeah.
Transportation, why is that an issue that is front of mind for Columbus's older population?
Similar to the rest of the U.S., Central Ohio, older adults, their primary way of getting around is driving. The vast majority of folks, that is their only mode of transportation. And what we know is that we will need to still go places beyond our driving retirement. And that is typically about 7 to 10 years, the end of our life, that we are not able to drive ourselves on a regular basis. That we need to still go places. And so how do we do that if driving is the way that we are all getting around?
And we also know that for many Americans, access to transportation and the independence and autonomy to choose when and where we go is really highly valued.
Yes.
And there's correlation between our self-rated physical and mental health and then how successfully we are able to get out and about and do what we want when we want. And so the availability, acceptability, accessibility, adaptability, and affordability, all these really great A words of transportation options is really, really important. And then too, just that our experiences as we use transportation can impact our mood.
Christine, you started to get into some of the obstacles that people may face if they can't drive. They can't drive because they don't have a car. They can't drive because, as Marisa said, they've retired from driving. What are some of those common obstacles?
We know from the research that you are far more likely to use alternative transportation as an older adult if you used it when you were younger. But we also know folks aren't. I can speak anecdotally about my personal networks. I have quite a few friends who ride bikes and consider alternative transportation, but those who don't are like, if we can't go in the car, we're not going.
It's overwhelming to start something new at any age, and definitely when it's been something you've been doing, maybe 50 or 60 years. And so I think that shift in mindset is a big challenge point for all of us, in particular for older adults. And we often think around the individual behavior change that is often a challenge, but also the infrastructure that exists to make that behavior change possible. Is there a bus stop near your home? Is that bus stop inclusive and accessible? We did a project around age-friendly transit stops and worked through support from Columbus Foundation with CODA, Central Ohio Transit Authority, to improve some bus stops that were near low-income older adult housing complexes that had previously been a pole in the ground, maybe in the grass or maybe in sidewalk, that now all have shelters with a bench and a trash can.
That's wonderful.
It is. And, I always love room to be surprised in the work that we do. And a really surprising takeaway for me in that project was when we were out in the community listening to our experience experts. I was shocked to hear about the value of a shelter beyond just being a shelter from the weather and a protection from that. We held a focus group with folks who were all either low vision or blind, and they shared about 2 ways that it was really important for them. That if you use a service animal, it's much easier to direct that animal to a shelter.
Sure.
Yeah, than to just a pole. And then if you don't, and you use a cane or you listen for the sounds, finding with your cane or listening for the sounds off of a shelter is much easier than just off of a pole. And so seeing that value beyond just the shelter as protection. And I think what I love about that story too is it's an example of what I want in a bus stop as a younger person who doesn't need it for those other reasons to be protected from the weather is what makes it work better for someone else with different abilities than me. And so we always use the reframe in the age-friendly community. What works for an older adult works for everyone.
I think recognizing that we're all going to face challenges of transportation, it's not an if, it's a when. We could have health issues, our vehicle breaks down. To be planful in what we will do benefits us at any age. And so Emma Strange, who's a mobility coordinator at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, MORPC, has collaborated with us to create a really beautiful mobility planning document where you can think about the regular places you're going to need to go throughout your week and what would you do if you couldn't get there using your typical mode?
We have really tried to look across the entire alternative transportation spectrum for supporting older adults in our community. And we've worked with some local partners to pilot community circulators. In Clintonville, every Tuesday, there's a circulator that goes around the community to some important places like Kroger or Walgreens.
Oh, sure.
To make sure that folks can get to those places. But then I'll let you talk about Lyft because that was with a similar group, but another approach to supporting different needs.
Yeah, so Lyft offers a concierge service. So in collaboration with the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging and Age Friendly, we're able to pilot a Lifting Villages initiative is what we called it. So folks who were part of a village here in Columbus were able to then request rides using Lyft. And through the initiative, we paid for the rides because I think cost is a really important thing to consider for folks. And while a Lyft once in a while might be something we could all budget for, taking a Lyft twice a week to go to dialysis becomes really burdensome for someone. And this project was intended to replicate some of the things we do through volunteer peer-to-peer driving programs here in Central Ohio, and then become a backup when there was an emergency need. So perhaps a ride that was needed on a weekend or really early or quite far away in a busy area where it might have been more challenging to find a volunteer to drive.
We talked about some of the obstacles that people face in terms of mobility, whether it's insufficient bus stops, sidewalks that haven't been plowed properly, you aren't able to use Lyft for whatever reason. What are some of the obstacles to fixing these solutions? It sounds like you have great ideas.
I mean, one of the largest obstacles is there is just a lot of work to do. We have built communities that have prioritized cars here in the U.S. We are not alone in that in Central Ohio, and we have phenomenal efforts going on around that. If you aren't familiar with the Link Us initiative, I'd encourage folks to look that up. Our communities are investing in sidewalks, but it takes a lot. And as we talked about, it's not one size fits all. And so it's going to take effort from all of our systems.
So I think Age Friendly's Safe Routes to Age in Place work has really helped us look at what is transportation and good and affordable and accessible transportation look like at the community level. So we've worked really closely in the Clintonville community and now in Union County to explore specifically what older adults want and need, and some different initiatives around walking and how can we assess the walkability of a neighborhood from an age-friendly lens? How can we add alternatives to the existing network so that they're collaborative and expansive and not duplicative?
You've shared so much with me. I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having us. And if I could be so bold as to have Christine share our little tagline for the closing, we'd love that.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for having us. And just a little reminder that aging's so cool, everybody's doing it.
That's great.
Jen Schlegel is a 2021 Ohio State grad with a degree in biomedical engineering who won Ohio State's 2020 President's Prize. She's also the founder and CEO of Be Enabled, a startup company designing projects that create accessibility solutions through technology. And if there's anyone who knows about hindered mobility and transportation options, it's her. Jen was born with cerebral palsy and deals with the inefficiencies and sometimes non-existence of accessible transportation options regularly. Now she's dedicated her time and efforts to help alleviate those hardships for others. She sits down with our Ross Bischoff to discuss the struggles she's had to deal with, what she's learned from those struggles, and how she's striving to make sure others don't have to deal with those same inconveniences.
Jen, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you, Ross.
You've dealt with so many chronic health issues your whole life. Would you be willing to maybe just share some of what those challenges have been for you?
So I'm a Christmas baby that was supposed to be an Easter baby. I was the baby that wasn't supposed to make it through the night. And from that, I have a brain damage-based developmental disability called cerebral palsy. I wasn't supposed to walk or talk. And so when I came into this university, I had 1 or 2 health problems, but I literally rolled away in the end with 15. Because I had an illness in 2016 that triggered an autonomic nervous system disorder called dysautonomia. And so from that, I got to learn a whole new world of chronic illness. I relearned how to walk 7 times. I've had more anesthesia than I am years old. And I only have good use of 4 of my fingers. College for me was this really long odyssey that in the end, I had a concussion, a wheelchair, a breathing machine, a cracked kneecap, some catheters, some feeding tubes, periods of temporary paralysis, and so much more. What I see as the challenges are what those experiences have caused in my life. So, the problems that have been produced or aggravated. So the financial strain, the social strain, educational, relational, and especially mobility. Those really are the things I think about when I think about the challenges and not so much about what my lived experience has been.
So what are the mobility challenges you face and others like you that maybe the rest of us don't know about?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges around this because there are so many misconceptions and so many restrictions. We have such a limited view of mobility where we think about going from point A to point B. Whereas if you're someone with a mobility concern, that gets a lot more complicated. It might be going from point A to point Z just to get to point B. Mobility issues, it's not just about transportation. The layout of a space to get through a building is just as important for mobility as it is to have a road to get from your house to your school or your workplace. If your elevator isn't working, you might have to wait on your elevator. And then because you've waited on your elevator, you might now miss your ride. And because some of the rules and restrictions that are around some of those ride services, it might be hours before you can get another ride. Imagine that feeling that you feel when the bus is late to pick you up, just in general. Imagine feeling that all day long because every step of your transportation journey, your mobility, something could potentially be going wrong. We don't really think about how mobility for these communities can be such a compound problem of so many layers of complexity that it's not as simple as just get in car, go to place.
Is that a consistent problem whether you're trying to get around a city like Columbus or a campus like Ohio State, or are there different problems based on wherever you're trying to get to?
I think that every location has its own unique set of challenges. I came from rural Ohio, where some of the accessible pickup systems there, you had a 2-hour window that they would pick you up in. So it was kind of hard to plan your life of not knowing, like, you might be picked up between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. That's very hard to predict what time you're going to get to work or the doctor's office or anything like that. So it feels like it's a whole day affair to get one place. Restrictions vary, but the restrictions are really painful. And that's one of the things I'd put a giant spotlight on for people that are unaware of some of the challenges. I'm currently visiting a location when I'm not here in Columbus that the accessible transportation, you have to schedule it 72 hours in advance. Think about your lives, everyone. Do you know what you're doing 72 hours from now?
Right.
Because I typically don't. And that's equally another exhausting thing about mobility processes is so often you can show up to a space and the caretakers of that space be like, oh, yeah, we can do accessibility, but we need notice in advance. So it's super painful to not be able to be spontaneous with your life. Think about the realities of the practicalities of, I want to work a job. I want to get an education. These systems really have to work together or you're really out of luck. Because, if I show up at a classroom that turns out, someone needed 2 days notice to set out a ramp for me, then I'm not getting in that classroom. And so it can be incredibly limiting, almost like a gatekeeper feeling of, oh man, I have to plan all of my life in advance all the time. And that's not realistic because life happens. And so we can't really treat accessibility within mobility as an optional add-on of something we can do only if you plan ahead. That's not the spirit of it. That's not what it needs to be. And that's not really helpful to anyone.
So Jen, you had an internship with the Ohio Department of Transportation. Can you talk about what that experience was like?
So of all the jobs I've ever worked that I miss the most, it's my time with ODOT that I miss the most. I worked for Drive Ohio, which is a subset of Ohio Department of Transportation. I was a consulting intern, focused a lot on mobility and accessibility during my time there. It was really remarkable in many, many ways, but I got to spend a lot of time talking about my lived experience and not just being someone who's coming in as representation and telling a story about hey, transportation isn't great, let's work on it, but really getting to think about the nitty-gritty of how can we make it better. The remarkable thing about Drive Ohio is that they're focused ahead. So instead of thinking about where transportation is right now, thinking about where it's going, my space within Drive Ohio was to basically make sure that in everything that we were talking about in the future of transportation, that I was throwing out, we have to think about accessibility. Not only being that kind of poster child for we need to think about accessibility, but also getting to collaborate and research and think about how do we actually do that? And so one of my big pillars was spending a lot of time talking about how, okay, here's what the landscape of accessible transportation currently looks like. That does not mean that it's all good or that it's all bad, but we can't just take today's paratransit system and turn it into an autonomous vehicle and call it a day. Because in my opinion, when we think about these many multimodal forms of transportation, paratransit to me is actually the space that has the most room for innovation because some of these standards and things that we set up were set up generations ago and really haven't moved forward since. So it's a great opportunity to put on an innovative hat and really build a transportation future that suits everybody.
When we talk about building a transportation future, how important is it to have a wide range of representation in those discussions?
I cannot say more at all ever about how important it is to have representation at a table. Now, in some ways, it doesn't even matter what the topic of the table is. It's that representation matters. Let me explain what I mean by that a little bit. So often I see when we're talking about a topic that we bring someone in to tell their story, to be the visual representation, to be a token, to be a figurehead. That's not going to solve any of the underlying problems. It is so important when you're solving a topic like mobility that you bring stakeholders from these other social determinants that factor into mobility, like the education, housing, etc. But then it's also incredibly important to bring in community stakeholders like me to really dig into the problem truly. Because if you don't have people in the room that live the experience, you might be completely missing the mark on what the problems behind that you're trying to solve actually are. You have, developmental disability, you have blindness, you have cognitive disabilities, you have people who are aging, you have temporary injuries, you have all these different experiences that you need a voice from all of those. And you also need to recognize that that is a voice from all of those, but is not the only voice from all of those, but at least it's somewhere to start. Because there is an incredible danger in only hearing a single story. But there's incredible power if you have a collective of those voices. And incorporating those voices into that table on a daily basis, every step of the stage of the process basis is so important. Because if you just ask someone what they think at the start of a project and just ask someone what they think at the end of a project, it kind of just becomes like performance theater, that you're looking for them to be like, oh, this is great at both ends. Of yes, that's a good problem. Yes, that's a good solution. But does it really, in the end, actually solve any problems?
One thing you said to me in the past that really I think people need to think about is if you're able-bodied at 30, you may not be that way at a different age. And so maybe people should be thinking about this a little bit more, correct?
Yes, I could not be a bigger proponent of the idea that accessibility is for everyone, because it really is. From your first day to your last day, at some point in your life, you're going to have mobility issues. Now, that might be because of a disability, because of a chronic illness, because of an injury, or because of something else entirely, but it's going to affect you. And if it doesn't affect you directly, it's going to affect someone you care about. And it's very easy to not think about these issues because you don't experience them. I know for me, like, there are some chronic illness issues that I never thought about until I lived it. But it's so important to invest into because it really does affect us all. I've always kind of used the analogy that suits well for mobility about, we have roads and we all use roads in different ways, but it helps us all get where we need to go. And so that's what's so critically important when we think about these things, because you're not investing into mobility or accessibility for someone you've never met. You're investing into it for your future, for your family's future, for your friend's future. It absolutely affects someone that you care about.
This has been really enlightening. Thank you so much for doing this.
It was really my pleasure, Russ. Thank you.
Getting from point A to point B shouldn't have to involve a point C, H, or Z. Everyone should be able to make it to their appointments on time, grocery shop when they need to or want to, easily connect with others in their community, go to a park and enjoy the scenery whenever they feel like it. Life is hard enough as it is. Tack on mobility and transportation issues to that, and things get exponentially more challenging. Thank goodness there are those out there working to remove these hardship variables for our communities, working to connect one another on a simpler scale, striving to bring point A just that much closer to point B. Now at Ohio State is produced by the Ohio State University's Office of Marketing and Communications. For more information, visit us at go.osu.edu/now. I'm your host, Jacob Carosa. Thanks for listening.